Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Connie Oshimura, and this is the Connie and Lottie Real Estate Podcast. Just for your information, Lottie is at the annual shareholders meeting for Berkshire Hathaway in Omaha, Nebraska. I have been a guest there the past 2 years, but here I am today with you talking about the do's and don'ts of HOA management. With me today is Steve Berggren, the current HOA manager for Dwell Realty for the next 5 days, right? And to my right is Thomas Moore, who's going to be the new executive director for the HOA management. We currently manage, according to our accounting department, 520 individual homeowners that are in an HOA and 20 HOAs, all right, which are themselves a standalone nonprofit organization. So, but just to give you a little broader perspective of HOAs, Steve, how many HOAs are there in the United States?
In the United States, there is roughly 370,000 different HOAs.
All right. That can include apartments, commercial properties, single-family homes as well. And HOA is required for any real estate-related organization that has common area interests. That could be as simple as a sign, or in a multi-family high-rise, it would be inclusive of all of the interior corridors, stairways, elevators, all that sort of other common areas as well. So how many are there in Alaska?
In Alaska, there's fewer than 1,000.
Okay, that's still quite a few for a population of about 620,000 people in the entire state. And how many are there in the Matsu and in the municipality of Anchorage, which is our basic territory?
The municipality of Anchorage is roughly 700, and the Matsu Valley is 100 to 300 approximately.
Well, that's pretty amazing, actually, for the number that we have in Anchorage, which is the municipality of Anchorage, which includes Eagle River, Chugiak, and Girdwood, my very famous place that I want to talk about a little bit someday, somewhere, somehow. But I think what is interesting is the emerging HOAs that are coming into the Mat Valley, because there is and has been previously a strong distaste for HOA management. Resistance. You want to call it resistance. So what have you experienced out there? Because you live out there and managing HOAs out there. So tell me a little about what you've...
Traditionally, the Mat Valley has had a resistance to HOA, primarily tied to its independent living style.
What is an independent living style? I thought we all had independent living styles.
Well, that would be like large lots and freedom to do what you want to on your lot, when you want to. And there's just been a feeling of like kind of a last frontier, not anything goes, but a much more relaxed approach towards established rules and guidelines.
So let's talk about that just a little bit more. Okay. So every subdivision in the Matsu is required to have covenants, codes, and restrictions before the plat itself can be recorded. That's my understanding. So a developer who owns the lots comes in and he has covenants, codes, and restrictions. And as long as he's there, he can enforce those covenant codes and restrictions. But what if he moves away, moves to Florida, right? What if he retires? What if he just decides this is too much work and not enough profit? I don't want to do residential land development anymore. What happens?
If they're being governed by the CCRs, there's no governing board for an individual homeowner to go to raise a complaint or propose a violation of those covenants, codes, and restrictions. So then they are left to handle it on their own independently. And currently, I believe the way to do that would be through the court system.
All right. So you can, if it's a health and safety issue, you can inform the local government, right? That would be, here in Anchorage, the assembly and the municipal government, right? And in the valley, it would be the Matsu Borough or the city of Wasilla. But it's my understanding that those entities only deal with very serious life and health threatening issues, right? So your recourse, like you said, is to go to the court system. And in Alaska, that would be your local superior court. Okay. And I understand that there is like a 6-month, if you file a lawsuit, there's like a minimum of a 6-month waiting period because they're so far behind. Right. And if you hire an attorney to do that, it can cost as much as $50,000. That's sort of the entry fee for trying to get your neighbor's blue tarp out of his front yard, so to speak, to make it really simple. Or the barking dog.
Or the Amazon boxes.
Or the pileup of the Amazon boxes and all of that sort of thing. So that's the reason why you ultimately have an HOA. I also think when you don't have an HOA and you have no one to go to, you don't have any protection for your values, for what we call your market value. I think of a situation in a subdivision that I know a lot about that has HOA, but doesn't have an HOA in itself. And across the street from this impeccably white house with blue trim and a manicured yard that always is mowed, right? And across the street literally is a junkyard. Everything that you could possibly think of is in the front yard. Now, I can't show you those photos because I might get in trouble, right? Because I may not have permission to show you those photos. But I drive by that situation probably once every 2 weeks. And I feel so sorry for the person that's in the White House that's taking care of their yard and their exterior. It's a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, generally speaking, an HOA, the purpose of an HOA is to uphold established guidelines and rules, pursuit of protecting and enhancing value and quality of life.
And in your experience, do you think they do that? Generally speaking?
A professionally managed HOA, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's always a cost to that. There is a cost to any sort of management. Now, tell me about an HOA. It is a standalone entity, the entity itself.
Yes,
right?
registered with the state.
Registered with the state. It's a nonprofit.
Nonprofit.
Right. And you have annual meetings.
Annual meetings, board of directors.
Okay. That have insurance. The board of directors has insurance.
Has insurance.
Yeah.
There's crime insurance involved. There's directors and officers insurance, and then in many cases there is a general liability insurance policy as well.
Okay. All right. And now you've learned all of this, and now you're leaving, right? All right. So where are you going? What are you going to be?
I'm going to be leaving this position to work for one of the many nonprofits in the Valley. Something I hold dear to my heart,
right.
And so I'm excited about that. I've learned a lot in this position. I think my business skills lend themselves well to this position. There's a lot, you do a lot of contracts, insurance work, working with different contractors, and going through the different governing documents in order to distinguish who's responsible for what, how, if an issue arises, how is it to be resolved? So there's been some really kind of interesting situations that have arisen that I've gotten to be part of the resolution and part of being able to address.
That's one of those. Without disclosing its location, but just a problem.
I spent a considerable amount of my time dealing with inclement weather issues and addressing the different needs that the different HOAs might run into, be it, rain, be it snow, Not so much summer maintenance. Those were
Mhm.
those are a little bit easier situations to navigate, but definitely our winters and the amount of rainfall and snowfall we get here is a challenge because each one of these 520 different households is having to address that and work their way through the seasonal changes that we all incur here. So
So, just to be specific, this was the largest snowfall we've ever had in several decades, right? We had 40 inches, right? And so when you think about flat roofs or you think about sidewalks, shoveling sidewalks, shoveling driveways. If you've got a private road, getting that road shoveled in a timely, plowed in a timely manner so everyone can get to work and all that sort of thing.
extreme cold. We had an extended period of cold this year that was kind of unprecedented. So that presented some different challenges.
Well, Thomas, this is your turn now. So, here you've heard all about the different challenges. You've been in training now for 2 weeks trying to learn from Steve about what he has to do and his challenges. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, about 6 months ago, I transitioned out of the army. So this is my first job outside of that, really. Since I've become an adult, so it's a privilege to be here. I'm very thankful, and I'm already learning a lot. I think something.
Let me interrupt.
Sure.
What did you do in the Army that you think helps qualify you for this management position?
No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, in the army, I think a lot of things do translate very well to this position, and even if it isn't an exact correlation to HOA management, right?
Okay.
So my biggest position within the army was as a heavy weapons platoon leader. So I managed a team of 16 soldiers, 5 gun trucks, along with tow missile systems, crow systems, and I was a paratrooper on top of it. So it was a very fun, exciting time. But there was also a lot of personnel management, a lot of I guess you wouldn't exactly call it project management in the classical sense, but there were events and timelines, and I had in the past had to get quotes from vendors and so on and so forth for events. So a lot of that does bleed over, and then
This position though is a lot less dangerous. You don't feel like your life is ever threatened, do you? When you're calling someone to talk to them about the barking dog next door or something like that, right?
oh, I should.
But actually, you're going to get the opportunity to establish some really good relationships.
Oh yeah. So I really just, one of the things I carried in my backpack from the army is just working with people. I love interacting with people, and like Steve said, solving problems. It's at least in the army, it was a special feeling when someone is having a hard time getting paid, and you could go into that office and solve that problem for them. Or hey, I have this issue with credit cards. I need some help. It's an 18-year-old kid. And obviously it's a little different, but homeowners have very important problems that HOA management does play a pivotal role in fixing.
You have some direct experience in HOA management because you own a condo, right?
That's correct.
Right? And so you belong to a condo association. How do you feel about that?
They do a lot of very valuable things. And I feel like my money that I spend on my dues is very well spent. I think that we already touched on it a little bit. And I won't say the condo association, but I do understand the management issues I think a lot of people have, especially in Alaska with HOA management. I get the frustration. I really do on a personal level. And so it'll be cool to be part of the solution.
The solution. You also own a single family home. Does it belong to an HOA?
It does not.
Oh, it does not belong. Oh, you said that with a smile on your face, did you?
Well,
You're
I'll tell you what.
anti-HOA.
No. Well, I'll tell you what. There's pluses and minuses. I am able to own chickens. I do like my chickens very much. But the flip side is a lot of the problems we already talked about are present in my neighborhood. Again, I obviously won't say where I live.
Right.
But you do have that problem where maybe someone has a caved in roof and they don't live there. And so they just let the damage sit, or maybe someone's working on 14 cars in their front lawn. It's things that, I kind of knew getting into it. And
14 or 4?
More likely 4 in my neighborhood, but there are places in Alaska
Yeah.
where there are 14 cars in a front lawn.
Oh my. Yeah. Okay.
I think
I'm an urbanite, so I've never seen 14 cars.
I think the Valley comes to mind for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's exciting. I think it's going to be a little different. And having come from that place where I do own a property both in an HOA and another property outside an HOA, I see the benefits to both and the lifestyle play that either one would bring. No, I did come on here, and I hate to ambush you, Connie and Steve, but I do have a question for you guys. So if you look at the per capita number of Americans who live in an HOA versus Alaskans who live in an HOA, you'll see that Alaskans are by far the lower number per capita. It's about 25 to 30% of Americans, but only about 10% of Alaskans. Do you guys think that that's what Steve was talking about earlier? Is that more of like an Alaskan culture kind of thing? And I guess a follow-up question on that, how do you see that affecting HOAs in the future in Alaska? Do you see the number rising?
Well, I guess what I would say is we are a rural area. We have some obviously urban population areas, and you're going to see most of the HOAs that are in Alaska are in populated areas.
Right.
So my belief about HOAs is they become more and more important as density increases. For example, if you have a subdivision where all the lots are 5 acres, you might be able to get away with 14 cars or trucks, right? Because you've got a lot of land around you. We have a tremendous amount of land, more than twice the size of Texas, more than I don't know how many times the size of the entire state of West Virginia as far as the Mat-Su. But as our population grows and consolidates in certain areas, then I think HOAs become more important. HOAs are very important when you're dealing with, say, for example, 10 units on an acre, okay, or 10 units on just an 8,000 square foot lot, which is, you can do a lot, okay? Especially if you have vertical construction, then I think it's very important that you have an HOA. So let me correct that. What I would say is I developed a subdivision, and we were able to get, I think, 4 units on a normal sized residential lot. So, but that's closer. So if you have attached units, okay, or units that are going vertical, there needs to be some clear definition of where the common area is. Is it a wall? Does it have an airspace in between it? Who's responsible for the water pipes going into the property? Is there one water pipe, one water connection, one sewer connection? And then is that divided equally between the 2 units that are attached? Well, it's not divided equally, actually. That's not how, generally speaking, that's not how AWW functions, right? So you could live next door to a unit with 4 kids, and then a single or double, a couple could live next door. They're not going to use as much water as the family that lives next door. So there are all sorts of issues that still need to be resolved. But basically, the more dense you are, the more reason you have for an HOA.
Right.
And so I think the reason that Alaska has a smaller number is because we simply don't have the population, but we have 6 times the number of square miles or so that you would find in 3 or 4 other states. So I think that's really the difference. And as population gets centered in these areas, not just Anchorage, but in the valley now and down on the Kenai, that sort of thing, then you're going to find the emergence of more HOAs.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. I think there are so many people that are anti-HOA. There is a cost to it. It's a monthly cost, and it includes insurance for the board of directors. It includes, in many instances, landscaping. Okay. For others, it includes painting the exterior or roof repairs and all that sort of thing. So what's very important is that you read the declaration. Okay. The declaration is what is created when there is an HOA, and they create, and within there are the rules for the entire subdivision. Okay. Then there is what's called, after that first declaration, when a property is resold, then it's called a resale certificate. And one of the things, if you really want to know about how your HOA association is doing, okay, you shouldn't just read the annual meeting notes, okay? They have meetings in between. Many of them have quarterly meetings, special meetings, that sort of thing. So if there's ever going to be a special assessment by an HOA on the members of a condo association, per se, which is where it's most likely to occur, all right, they're going to talk about that for several months.
Right.
Okay. And that will be in the meeting notes. All right. They will talk about it for several meetings before they actually vote to have the special assessment. So, and that special assessment may not be next month. It may be 6 months from now or whatever. So if you have a buyer that comes in and buys that condo and they haven't read the minutes, and then they're in for 2 or 3 months and they have a special assessment that comes in the mail, then they're gonna be very upset because they're gonna say, "Where did that come from?"
Right.
Well, it's all a matter of record. So what I would say that the responsibility when realtors are listing and selling property, particularly, it's important for the realtor that's representing the buyer to make sure that they read either the public offering statement, which is for new construction, or they read the resale certificate. Now, it used to be in the olden times, we would print all of that, right? But now we don't print it. We hand them a thumb drive, right? And I would say in many instances, that thumb drive is never plugged in and read. So I would say there's probably 30 or 40% of the people that buy a condo that don't have a clue in terms of what they're buying and who they're going to be, what they're going to be responsible for. Would you agree?
Oh, I would agree. Like I get quite a few calls where somebody will call and ask for information, and we're always happy to provide anything that we can and clarify situations and provide information. But in most instances, those questions could have been answered by reviewing the resale certificate. And quite frequently, the individual will say, "Yeah, I got something at closing," or "I got something before," and I never looked at it.
Well, I think for those of you that are thinking about buying a condo that are listening today, you have to read your public offering statement. You have to read your resale certificate.
Yeah.
And if you are working with a realtor, they have a responsibility to provide you with that information and to discuss it with you. And for those of us that manage associations, we are available to answer any questions before you close the sale, not afterwards, because after you close the sale and you have a mortgage, you are responsible. That is a legal document, all right? And you are responsible.
Yeah, understanding your disclosure, understanding your financial statements, understanding the budget, understanding when the annual meetings are, reviewing the meeting minutes is all very important because you're being bound by those documents, the declaration, the bylaws, understanding all of that thoroughly.
And you cannot tell by looking at a piece of property whether it has an HOA. You cannot determine that. For example, there are major subdivisions here that have HOAs that are single family, and you wouldn't think they had an HOA because, gee, they're nice lawns and they're large lots and all that sort of thing. But they do have an HOA, so you can't tell by looking at it. So now let's take a duplex, for example, side by side, right? They could also be part of a planned unit development. They could have an HOA, they could have a common wall, or they could be on a small attached zero lot line. And that zero lot line says that the only thing that they have in common is that wall, right? But that in that zero lot line situation, someone on the right-hand side could be taking very good care of their property, right? They could replace the fence. All right. They could paint it a nice neutral color, right? They could fix their porch. They could mow their lawn. They could plant some shrubs, right? And the one that they are attached to could do nothing. Absolutely nothing. Okay. It could be falling down, and there's nothing that anyone could do about it because it doesn't belong to an HOA. Now, that happened a lot in the 1980s. All right. When we have zero lot lines. Okay. Fee simple on and each side owns their own land. That's the only thing that they share in common is the common wall. Now, then later on, a decade or two later, we have the townhouse that is covered by an airspace, right? Again, the only thing that they have in common is the wall, right? And when you have an airspace, a bubble around the building and around the entire lot, then they are responsible for everything. The owner is responsible for everything. And again, you have that same situation. So you have one owner that is responsible and does take care of his property, his or her property. And on the other side, you have someone that does absolutely nothing. And you have to read your HOA documents really to understand, is there a responsible party or is there not a responsible party? Is the HOA active, right? We have HOAs that are not active. The most dangerous type of HOA, and I'm going to get in trouble when I'm saying this, are the ones that are self-managed. Self-managed. Okay. So let's say you have someone that built a fourplex, 4 townhouse style units, and the owner that built it is living in one unit, right? And he or she decides that they are going to manage it themselves. That is the most dangerous position for the other 3 owners, right? So I personally would never live in an HOA that was managed by, that's self-managed. So they decide to self-manage. Usually it happens with very small units, 2, 3, or 4 units, because they want to save the management fee. So a management fee can be anywhere from $20 to $40 a month per unit, depending upon the amount of responsibility and what they all have to do. So are you telling me for $20 a month, which is how many cappuccinos? 2?
Not many.
Not many cappuccinos. All right. You're going to spend how many hours hassling with your neighbor? I mean, it absolutely makes no sense whatsoever, right? So I'm a big advocate of not fighting with your neighbor, right? Because you can complain, but it's not going to get you anywhere. I mean, if they've already got 3 trucks in their front yard and a boat, because you complain about that, do you think they're going to take 3 trucks and a boat off their yard? They're not going to do that.
They might add another one.
They might add another one for spite, right? Right. Or the same thing about if you're living in a townhouse configuration and you have a gray or, a blue gray or, a really neutral color, right? And the other person next door decides to paint their house pink. What are you going to do? I mean, pink does exist, right? And yellow exists, Basically, what you're talking about with an HOA is protecting your long-term values of the property. You're going to, a buyer, it's a statistical fact that a buyer will drive through a neighborhood somewhere between 7 and 9 times during different times of the day or night just to see how that community functions, right? And so what are they going to see? That person that chose not to live in an HOA is running the risk that his property is not going to have the same appreciation as one that is in an HOA. So that's one thing to take in consideration. Now, when you get into multiple units, all right, everybody has to pay for water and sewer, right? Okay. And in multiple units, that's usually a shared expense. But your smart mortgage originator will be able to deduct the cost for the water and sewer on a monthly basis and give you a credit against your dues, okay? Because everybody lives with public water and sewer has to pay, right? So that then is an opportunity that the smart loan originator will be able to deduct that from the dues. So if the dues is $330 and the water and sewer amounts to $75, they could deduct that amount from the HOA monthly dues, which makes it easier for that buyer to qualify even though it's in an HOA. First-time home buyers will frequently say, I don't want to be a member of an HOA because then I can afford to buy more, right, as far as my property, potential property is concerned. But take that into consideration, all right, because there is that benefit. There's also a benefit if there is going to be an assessment, and there are older HOAs in very nice buildings, but, you know, a roof only lasts so long, right? And a paint job only lasts so long, right? And so you'll have to have a special assessment if you don't have adequate reserves to take care of that. But the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation does have a program where where the HOA can finance that assessment. And that's a very, very positive thing. Where most OAs fail, however, is they do not keep up with their reserves. And you just had that experience. Do you want to share that, Steve?
Yeah, so you can run into a situation where an HOA is not wanting to adequately fund for reserve items, future costs that such as roofs, painting,
Driveways.
And when an HOA is not adequately setting aside dues, annual dues, monthly dues, a portion of for these items, they get into a situation where they're not financially solvent in the future. If they're not prepared and adjusting those costs as the years roll by, they're going to get to a point where one of those reserve items, let's say a roof, is needing to be repaired, and they don't have the financial means to be able to repair or to replace that roof. And so there's a balance between the HOA dues and being financially sound and, you know, keeping dues at a minimal. And that's where, you know, as a professional HOA manager, we try to work with HOAs and HOA boards to make sure that we're stressing the importance of setting aside reserves over the course of time to be able to address those future reserve expenses that they're going to occur.
Thank you for that, because in reality, if you don't have adequate reserves and you are selling your condo or townhouse or a single family home that's in an HOA, and if they do not have adequate reserves, you are probably unlikely, you are not going to be able to sell that to a buyer who has an AHFC, wants an AHFC loan, a VA loan, or an FHA loan.
And lenders do look at reserves. So when we get a condo questionnaire, we get questions from lenders regarding HOAs. You know, lenders are looking at those condo questionnaire. We're forwarding on budget information. We're forwarding on financials. We're giving them a detailed recording of where that HOA is sitting financially.
Yeah.
And that's one of the very most important things that an HOA can do for, besides the aesthetic point, is maintaining long-term financial stability.
Well, that's true for any HLLC or operating company. You know, what I say over and over again, regardless of the type of company it is, you know, if you don't have a good back room, that's what I call it. You know, you're not going to stay in business for very long.
That financial stability may not only be reserves, but it might also be insurance.
That's
you know, making sure that insurance policies are up to date, making sure that the contractors that are contracted with are licensed, insured. All of those things that a professional HOA manager works with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, you said something here very, very important. You know, all of the subcontractors that you work with, all right, for roads, painting, driveways, landscaping, whatever, all need to be, and I'm going to say this strongly, currently licensed, bonded, and insured. because a lot of these small businesses, when they start up, they will go get their insurance bond, right? And then they forget about it, or they also forget about renewing their license, right? And so we have to say, we need to see your currently licensed bonded insurance, right? And business licenses. Business licenses need to be renewed on a regular basis. And you are responsible if you do not check all of that and hire people accordingly for the job to be done. And it's pretty common in a community that is small, like ours is small, really, relatively speaking, that we have a lot of handymen. We have a lot of people that have pickup truck and some yard equipment and all of that sort of thing. But if they're not licensed, bonded, and insured, and you let them on your property, all right, as an individual or as someone that's contracting through an HOA, you have a liability issue if something happens, right? So that's one of the things that I think is so important, because most of the people that live in an HOA really don't want anything to do with the HOA. Really,
No, they're coming and going.
they're coming and going. They're living. They're taking care of their kids. They're sending them here or there. They're going on vacation. They really don't want to be bothered, right? When I lived in Peterson Towers, which is an HOA, a mixed-use building downtown, right? I never went to a meeting. I just paid my dues on a...
Oh, that's what you were paying for.
That's what I was paying for. And the elevator always worked. The hallways were always clean. And I didn't have to pay any attention to it because I knew that it was being properly managed. So it also gives you a lot of relief if you have good property management, right? So you've got a lot of responsibility here, Thomas.
Okay.
What do you think? Do you still want your job?
Absolutely. Well, here's one thing I'll kind of add on to that too. As I'll say a very small time real estate investor, but still an investor since I do have a rental property. The peace of mind that comes with having a rental property with an HOA is phenomenal. Phenomenal, specifically a condo. Knowing that, the scope of things that could go wrong with that house is much more limited than if it was outside of an HOA. Really just takes a huge burden off my mind every month.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's really very nice. But do you know what happens if your water pipe breaks? Who are you responsible for the water pipe that breaks, or is the HOA? That's a big issue that we have, that we face now. Is if your pipe gets frozen and breaks, and you don't have any water, you have to go to your declaration and your construction documents to figure out, is this my responsibility or is this is the HOA responsibility, So, but I appreciate the fact that you have that experience, living in an HOA, living outside of an HOA. That's going to help you immensely because you're going to be able to have a lot of empathy for the members of that HOA and that board. Right.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's it. That's our wind up on the do's and don'ts of an HOA. We leave you with those thoughts, but the primary thought is if you are going to consider buying a property that has an HOA, read the minutes of, not just the minutes of the meeting, of the annual meeting, but all of those minutes in between, and make sure that you read your documents. And if you're buying into one of the units we manage, we would be more than happy to have, not me, Thomas, to have a conversation with Thomas as well. And me, of course, if you need to. But in any event, we want to encourage you to have and consider property with an HOA. Thank you.